So, hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Caitlin, and today I decided we needed a follow-up to last week's video. We needed a follow-up to We Need Less Men in Science Fiction Fantasy. And my follow-up to that is to look at all of the women in science fiction fantasy that I've read from 2020 on, and to showcase them all in a video. Whether I've hated their books, loved their books, or they're just in between mediocre, there's something for everyone. And I'm sure that you'll find an author in here that tickles your fancy, okay? Okay, so just before we start, I do want to say, I did research. I wanted to make sure that everyone on this list identifies as a woman. And if I miss anyone that you see on my Goodreads, my bad. I am sorry, but I really don't think I missed anyone, okay? Did my research, found their pronouns, and I just want to hop right in. There could always be more intersectionality on these lists, okay? Always more intersectional women, but that is what growth and reading is for, okay? So hopefully by this time next year, we'll have a bigger, more intersectional list of women on this list, and we can go and talk about a bunch of new favorite books, okay? But for now, I want to take you through, like I said, all of the women that I've read in science fiction fantasy from 2020 on. And let's jump right into it. First, we have S.A. Chakraborty. She has written the David Trilogy. If that is something you haven't heard of, I'm honestly a little bit surprised if you are in the science fiction fantasy sphere. I personally did not like the David Bad. I only read the first book in the trilogy, but a lot of people adore S.A. Chakraborty and her writing. So she is definitely a force in science fiction fantasy to be reckoned with. And if you haven't checked her books out, check them out. Maybe they're for you. But yes, first on this list is S.A. Chakraborty, just to get her over with. Get her off the list. You know, stop talking about her quick and early, because for me, her books didn't work for me. But like I said, everyone has different tastes, and what doesn't work for me may really work for you. So yeah, check her out. If the David Bad trilogy, if you do your research and that sounds interesting to you. From what I remember, the David Bad trilogy, I don't remember much of it, okay? And I don't want to give you a synopsis to books I don't remember. So go look it up on Goodreads. If that sounds interesting, give it a gander. But yes, S.A. Chakraborty. Next, we're moving on to Tams and Muir and the Loch trilogy. Her books are super, super science fiction, super twisted, just confusing, honestly, especially the second book, Harrow the Ninth. I will tell you what Gideon the Ninth is about. So basically we follow Gideon, our main character, who so desperately wants to escape or get off of their home planet. And they get the opportunity to do this, but the catch is they have to go with their arch nemesis to this house of sorts where they fight to unsolve this mystery. And I don't want to give too much away, but this is a really, really great set of novels. Third book comes out in November, so I highly recommend reading this if you haven't already. Hop on that train while you can right now. Next, we have Saga Tahir, and she... Oof, sorry, it's dusty. I haven't taken this book off the shelf in a while, but she has written the Ember and the Ashes series. It is so good. What I did not realize while I was looking up Saga Tahir, checking her pronouns and such, I saw Reddit threads that said the characters in this novel use gender-neutral pronouns, which I find super interesting. So yeah, maybe I'll give it a reread. This would be the third time rereading An Ember and the Ashes for me. But Saga Tahir is super talented. If I remember correctly, this book follows our male, who is a part of this guardian school, and he is training to become, you know, this kind of ruthless guardian for the state. And our female main character has lost a sibling, and I believe she's either trying to avenge his death or find him. And I can't quite remember which one it is. It's been a while since I've read these books, but yeah, Saga Tahir is a really great author. This is YA, so if you're interested, check her out. I know she just has a new release also. I forget the name of the book, but she also has a new release if you're interested in that. So yes, Saga Tahir. I want to talk about Piranesi and Susanna Clark. I absolutely loved this book when I read it in the beginning of 2021, I believe it was. And Piranesi is finally getting the flowers it so well deserves. Susanna Clarke is so talented with her writing, and this book, I would call it magical realism. I'm going to kind of group these all into science fiction fantasy because why not? But basically, this novel, without giving too much away, is about our main character, Piranesi, who is inside this mansion. He's slowly losing his memories, his mind, pretty much, and there's ocean in this mansion. I'm not quite sure how to explain the water element of this book, but if you haven't read this, I highly, highly, highly implore you to read it. And Susanna Clarke as a whole. I know she has another book, written. I haven't read that one, but I have read Piranesi and highly enjoyed it. So, yeah, highly recommend it, and I highly recommend Susanna Clarke. Next, we have Robin Hobb with The Assassin's Apprentice. While The Assassin's Apprentice wasn't really for me, I didn't move on with the book and series. Robin Hobb has a whole bunch of book series that I believe are all set in the same world. So if you enjoy Brandon Sanderson, Cosmere type stories, Discworld type stories, this is probably something you might be interested in. While writing styles aren't necessarily the same, they do have kind of that interwoven concept to them. The Assassin's Apprentice, specifically, is about a bastard of a king who comes to live with the king in his castle, and he needs to train to become an assassin. And I'm pretty sure he could talk to animals. So that is what The Assassin's Apprentice is about. If that sounds interesting to you, give Robin Hobb a shot. She is well known for a reason. People love her books for a reason. And for that reason, she's a big name for women in science fiction fantasy. Next, we have Roseanne Brown from A Song of Wraiths and Ruin. This is another book that I read a really long time ago. And if I remember correctly, it has something to do, our main male character summons a spirit. I don't remember quite how, and the spirit steals his sister. And in order to get his sister back, he has to kill the heir to the throne. I think that is the premise of the first book. I've read the first book, haven't given the second book, I haven't picked it up yet, but I'm waiting for the third book to come out, so that way I could just reread the first book and then binge the rest of the trilogy. But yeah, Roseanne A. Brown, this was a really fun book. YA, if that is something that sounds interesting to you, give it a shot. Next, we have Namina Forna, who wrote The Gilded Ones. And The Gilded Ones pretty much is another YA fantasy about women, and they have this ritual every year when these women come of age, and they have to show that they have red blood. If they have gold blood, they are sent off to this army camp and have to learn how to be in battle. Super interesting book. It was okay if you're interested in YA, if you really love YA fantasy, this could be something that interests you. I believe that it was a little lower on the ranks of YA fantasy that I've read in the past 2 years, but still, women in science fiction fantasy, and they need to be given their flowers, they need to be supported. So check it out if it sounds interesting to you. Then we have someone pretty damn obvious, and that's Cassandra Claire with all of the Shadowhunters world. Again, more magical realism, but at the same time, very fantastical. If you haven't heard of Cassandra Clare and her books, I'm not quite sure where you have been, okay? I'm not quite sure. But she was a big staple for me when I was reading back in high school. So again, YA, if you are a lover of YA, enjoy YA, really love angsty romance, I would say Cassandra Clare is the one for you. She has had 2 adaptations made out of her original Mortal Instruments series, neither of which have gone anywhere. But Jamie Campbell Bower is now a staple in modern day pop culture, which sends me for a loop. Jace, it's just crazy. So yeah, if that sounds interesting to you and you haven't read Cassandra Clare at all and you like YA, definitely something to pick up to be kind of in the know in pop culture, number 1. And number 2, like I've said a million trillion times, let's give these women their flowers. And while Cassandra Clare has all the flowers, she's certainly not popular, we still want to support her. So yeah, that's that. Let's move on. Next, we have Samantha Shannon, which has become a very phenomenal author, in my opinion. So first, we have the Bone Season series, which if you haven't read it, I totally think you should. I don't even want to give a synopsis for the first book because in my opinion, the first book is completely different from the rest of them. So what I will say is that the Bone Season is set in a dystopian London surrounding people with psychic abilities, divination abilities, and that is kind of the magic system that we're talking about. So interesting, super good. If you didn't like the first book, move on please, because it's just so much different as you move on and gets more gives you more depth, gives you more of the magic system, gives you more emotion, character building, world building, besides just kind of this romance plot that we get in the first book. And I highly recommend you read it. Pick it up if you haven't. Another Samantha Shannon classic is Priory of the Orange Tree. While this is her standalone fantasy epic, I do prefer the Bone Season series just because I think they're more fleshed out since it's a series. But Priory of the Orange Tree, I remember in 2020 being one of my favorite fantasy books. If I were to reread it now, would it hold up the same? What's it called? Would it hold up the same? I don't know. I don't know. But I would sure give it a reread, and it certainly holds. I hold fond memories of this book. So if you don't know what this book is about, it is pretty much. I'm pretty sure it's set based on an English mythological retelling. If I'm not mistaken, it follows two women, and one of them, I don't even know how to explain it. Go to Goodreads, do your research. If this sounds interesting to you, it's definitely a feminist fantasy take. LGBTQIA plus representation. You should read it if you're interested in that. And Samantha Shannon as a whole is a super awesome science fiction fantasy author, and you should definitely give her a shot because she just has impressed me every time I've picked up a book of hers. Next, we move on to another author who isn't necessarily my favorite, but has made quite the resurgence through, Book Talk and YouTube, and that's Leigh Bardugo. And the Shadow and Bone trilogy and the Six of Crows duology, Ninth House, which I actually liked Ninth House, but Shadow and Bone and Six of Crows are definitely kind of her two more fantastical books, and that's what I'll be talking about. Shadow and Bone, if you don't know what it's about, how? I feel like I hear everyone and their mother talking about the Darkling and Elena, and quite honestly, it is not high up on the list of YA fantasy for me at all. I've read a lot of YA fantasy. This one doesn't cut it for me. People love it, though. So, if it sounds interesting to you, don't listen to me, pick it up, and especially take what I say about Six of Crows with a grain of salt, because I fucking hate that duology. I've even reread both of the books to see if it was just me the first time reading it. No, still didn't like it. If you're one of those romance girlies right now who's reading things like Shadow and Bone, Six of Crows, Shatter Me, the Legend trilogy, get your ass out of 2012. I have plenty of other recommendations for you that you can read that aren't those. Let's leave the pick-me dystopian girls back with the pick-me dystopian girls. We don't need to go back there. There are plenty of other romance fantasy-based books you can read. But I digress. People love Leigh Bardugo, and I don't want to take people's love and joy away. So, Leigh Bardugo is definitely a force to be reckoned with in science fiction fantasy. She has her adaptations, she's popular, and she's making waves for herself, and I can't take that away from her. Okay? I can't. So Leigh Bardugo is on this list. Next, we have Witches Steeped in Gold by Ciaran Smart. Wow. This is my second time filming this, by the way. And what I didn't notice is that I remember a fuck ton about this book. I didn't think I did until I went to go sit down and talk about it. Wow. And that means for me that I'm 110% going to be picking up the sequel when it comes out. So, Witches Steeped in Gold is pretty much about we're following two witches from two rival witch gangs, okay? And one of the witches believes that, and she's kind of like the witch gang on the outskirts, believes that she is the rightful heir to the throne. And then we follow our other character who is the rightful heir to the throne. Her mother is on the throne, but she plans on killing her mother. She's a part of this rebel group. I really enjoyed this book. Sienna's smart. She's smart. And if you haven't, give it a gander. Give it a gander. Give it a try. I really enjoyed this book, and like I said, it stuck with me, which is something that says a lot. So, Miss Smart is on this list. She deserves the flowers, the accolades for this book, okay? So give it to her. Next, we have Miss Chloe Galong. Whew! Chloe Gong with These Violent Delights. While this wasn't my favorite book in the world, I do remember having a lot of fun while reading it. This is set in 1950 Shanghai, and we kind of have a magical twist on it, and it's a Romeo and Juliet retelling. We're following two different gangs trying to figure out this mystery in, like I said, 1950s Shanghai. Super, super, super fun. While for me, it wasn't, the most riveting book, the book that sticks with me the most, it wasn't that. But for YA readers, I'm sure you'll really enjoy this. Plus, These Violent Ends, the sequel to this duology, this book, is currently out, and I believe it's either a new release or it's coming out. Foul Lady Fortune by Chloe Gong. So, yes, if you haven't read Chloe Gong, I highly recommend it. Let's give our girl some flowers. She is young and paving the way in the publishing industry. Okay, hell yeah. Hell yeah. Next, we have one of my favorite authors of all time, R.F. Kuang. This wouldn't be a video. This wouldn't be a video about science fiction fantasy from Caitlin J. Reads without talking about The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang and just R.F. Kuang in general. If you haven't read this book, you really should. Basically, we follow our main character, Ren, who goes to this military school, and they are thrust into this war. I absolutely adore this. Okay, absolutely adore it. There's magic in here, shaman magic, which is super awesome to watch. And for me, it's filled with flawed characters. It's filled with grim, dark magic. If you need to look up trigger warnings for this, please do so before reading. But R.F. Kuang just is so masterful when it comes to including history in her work and, showing parallels, but still having it be enjoyable for people who don't necessarily know the history. And I absolutely love that. So excited for Babel, which is coming out in August, and so excited for Yellowface, which I believe is May of 2023. R.F. Kuang, if you haven't read her already, what are you doing? Please do. Because I want to get an animated cartoon Poppy War, okay? Next, we have Martha Wells with the Murderbot novellas. And it's been a really long time since I've picked up the Murderbot novellas, but I remember them being such a blast. If you love science fiction, you love science fiction, then you'll really love the Murderbot Diaries. They're light, they're fun, and we're following a Murderbot, quite obviously, who doesn't really want to murder people anymore. He's not murderous. He doesn't have a murderous bone in his body. So he just sits there and watches sitcoms through his lines. And obviously there are much more to these novellas, much more to these stories, but that is kind of the basis of what it is. They're super fun, super funny, and Martha Wells is a genius, okay? Is a genius when it comes to Murderbot. And she has other works out as well. I highly implore you to go and look up Martha Wells. Give her flowers, give her coin, and buy her books. Then we have Lyndon A. Lewis and the First Sister Trilogy. When I talk about recommendations for the romance girlies, this is a low spice, if any spice at all, as the romance girlies will say. But this is definitely a sci-fi based romance book. This is phenomenal. I don't hear nearly enough people talking about First Sister. Pretty much what this is about, especially the first book, I feel like is more romance based than the second, but the first book is really about someone who is what we call a first sister, nameless. They're part of this society which the sisters cannot speak, cannot communicate to people outside of the sisterhood. I believe that they have hand talk between sisters, but they cannot speak. And this book is pretty much about the first sister establishing a connection with the new captain on board and communicating with them and just figuring out that there's so much more than what they're labeled as. And I absolutely adored this book. If you haven't picked it up already, please do. Lyndon A. Lewis, their works are phenomenal. I absolutely adore it. I'm so excited for The Last Hero, which comes out in November again. So yeah, Lyndon A. Lewis, if you haven't picked up their work, definitely recommend. Put down Shatter Me, put down Legend, and pick up The First Sister. Then we have my girl, Fonda Lee. Again, another author that it's like, you can't get through a Caitlin J. Reads video without hearing about Fonda Lee. I get it, but there's a reason why I talk about her and the Greenbone Saga until my face goes blue. Alright? This book series is so damn good. She weaves together great character building, amazing world building, political intrigue, amazing magic systems, and very flawed characters, and she weaves it into this beautiful tapestry of the series. And in my opinion, it's one of the best modern science fiction fantasy books we have. I just was so attached to these characters, so drawn to the story, so drawn to the magic system, that I cannot help but constantly gush about Fonda Lee and the Greenbone Saga. If you don't know what this is about, you haven't been watching my videos, but pretty much it's about two rival gangs, the Mountain and No Peak. We follow some of the family from the No Peak clan, and they reside in the city of Kacon, of John Loon in Kacon. And pretty much as we go on, the story expands kind of more and more, and the stakes are elevated in such a masterful way. Fonda Lee really knows what she's doing, and this series is just like one of the top for me. So if you haven't picked up Fonda Lee, I really highly recommend it. This was supposed to be a Peacock TV show, and they fucking dropped it. I am like, while I'm fucking highly disappointed, good. Take it off of Peacock. Let's get HBO Max on this shit. Because I want to see some fucking drug use. I want to see some battle, some blood, some grim darkness that is this book. So you know what? Maybe it's a good thing Peacock didn't pick it up. Maybe we'll get it on HBO Max, because this really would be a great adaptation. Anyways, I'm going to stop rambling on about Fonda Lee so we can move on. Next, I have V.E. Schwab. V.E. Schwab is kind of this very iconic author, for me at least, because I've known V.E. Schwab from, like I mentioned before, when I was reading kind of back in high school, during the Cassandra Claire days. You know, I knew The Savage Song, Vicious was just coming out, and V.E. Schwab was kind of making their way, waves in the science fiction fantasy series. After coming back, post-graduating college, she has like a million more books. Personally, I have read Gallant, which is her most recent middle grade release. I'm not the target audience for this. I wish it was longer, wish it was a little more horrific, but that's okay. I'm sure this was really good for its target audience, and if it sounds interesting to you, pick it up. If you like The Haunting on Hill House, pick it up. Maybe you'll enjoy it. But yeah, Gallant. I've also read A Darker Shade of Magic by Miss V.E. Schwab, which I really adored. This was one of the books that I actually read on audiobook while I was in school, in college, when I stopped reading. So I have a really great connection to this, because this was the series that still held a thread for me when I wasn't reading. And for that, V.E. Schwab, I am eternally grateful for you. But moving on from her good works, we have The Secret Life of Addie Larue. Sorry if you're watching this, V.E. Schwab, I'm sure you're not, but not my favorite. I know that's like your life's work. I'm sorry. You'll have better life's work. You'll have better epics. I just know you will. You're so talented. But for me, Addie wasn't it. Is it because Addie follows a het romance? That could very well be it. I would have loved to see Addie with a woman, especially knowing that V.E. Schwab kind of came into her sexual journey later on in life. I would have really loved to see Addie with a woman and V.E. Schwab exploring their sexuality in that. But that is so personal. That's not something, like, while I would have enjoyed seeing it, that's not something that I'm like, I demand to see. I demand to be written about. Because if someone doesn't want to write about that in that process, it is so personal, and that is so completely fine. But with that being said, would have loved to see that. Would have loved to see that. Next, we have S.T. Gibson, and they wrote A Dowry of Blood, which is pretty much a historical fantasy, Dracula, but obviously I'm including it in science fiction fantasy because, like, vampires are, like, fantastical creatures. But pretty much it's about a polygamous relationship, abuse, power, control between Dracula and the rest of the people that he turns into vampires. It's a super short read, and it's so beautifully written that I really highly recommend you read it, listen to it. S.T. Gibson is so talented, and the way they were able to craft their prose was very, very beautiful. So I highly recommend giving this a read. S.T. Gibson in general. This is the only book of S.T. Gibson's I've read, but like I said, we are including every single female that I've read in science fiction fantasy on that list, and they are one of them. So absolutely loved A Dowry of Blood. You should pick it up if you haven't, especially because it's a super short read. Next, we all know where this is going. Jen Williams and the Winnowing Flame Trilogy. I've only finished The Ninth Reign. We are on and reading The Bitter Twins now, but it's like some of my favorite works ever. Hands down, it's so unique and explorative, and we follow characters that are just so unique to fantasy. You know, it's not very often that you see a middle-aged black woman being followed as a main character instead of a middle-aged white man, and the juxtaposition of that is so beautiful to me. It gives me everything I want when I talk about I don't want to read from the same perspectives. Granted, Jen Williams is a white woman, but I really, really love how she includes diverse perspectives in her books. And also, she doesn't necessarily write about the black experience, which I find important because she's not a black woman. So I just love the Winnowing Flame Trilogy. If you don't know what it's about, hi, welcome to my channel. It is about what we call the Aboran people, I don't know. They're fae-like creatures, and they are pretty much the guardians of this planet, and they save all of civilization from being destroyed by this alien species that comes and tries to wipe out their planet. They have come and tried to wipe out their planet 8 times, and we are following the 9th time in this set of books, where the Aborans are going extinct, and the Juralia and the Juralia are coming back with a vengeance. But there are secrets, and there's so much more to that than what I just expressed, and I really, really recommend you pick it up because, wow, so good. Jen Williams, give her her flowers. Then we have S.A. Barnes with Dead Silence. I know this is a horror, but it's also science fiction, in my opinion. If you can imagine, if you missed my elevator pitch for this book in my June wrap-up, if you can imagine Titanic meets The Lost Malaysian Flight meets finding it 20 years later in undesignated space, that's what this is. And we follow our main character and her crew, and it's kind of shows their demise and what happened to this lost vessel that they stumble upon. And some crazy shit happens. Shit hits the fan. I really recommend you read this. The more I think and talk about it, the more I really like this book and want to bump up stars, want to reread it, just because that concept is just so, so good. But yes, S.A. Barnes. I haven't read any other books by S.A. Barnes. I know they go by a different alias for YA, and I'll insert that. Here, I forget the alias, haven't read any of their YA works, but yes, S.A. Barnes, Dead Silence. Check her out. Give her her accolades. Give her her flowers. And the last woman that I want to talk about is the queen, in my opinion, of science fiction fantasy, is the pinnacle of masterful writing in science fiction fantasy, is the pinnacle of scientific fantasy that just makes sense, that grips you, that grabs you, the master of narrative, the master of perspective, N.K. Jemisin. There is nothing more to say about this woman and her works besides the fact that they are just phenomenal. I first read the 5th season in 2020, kind of before I got into adult fantasy. And, oh god, I have an eyelash in my eye. And I did not appreciate the 5th season like I know I could have, because I just reread this after having a lot more, adult science fiction fantasy under my belt, understanding a little bit more about science in fantasy and science fiction. And I just recently reread this book, and wow, she's just, like, she does it like no one other. Miss Jemisin freaking does it like no one else. If you haven't read this book already, I don't know how you haven't. It's a super popular book. If you're afraid of it, don't be. Please pick it up. There is stuff foreshadowed, especially after, I finished the trilogy. There's stuff foreshadowed in this from the fucking very first page, and I absolutely loved it. Talk about diverse characters, talk about inclusivity, talk about intersectionality, talk about fucking parallels between this universe, the Broken Earth trilogy, and our planet. Hands down, one of the most impactful fantasy novels I've ever read. And upon reread, I just loved it that much more. So if you haven't picked up the 5th season, you should. It is about a set of people called Origins who are able to harness the power of the earth below them, or, just energy around them because they can ice people out, to do kind of their magic, again, involving the earth, fault lines, minerals, stuff of this nature. There's so much more to this besides what I'm explaining. It has scientific backing, and it just makes sense. And I love that for N.K. Jemisin. I've also read The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin, which, again, one of my all-time favorite audiobooks. If you've read my audiobook or seen my audiobook video, you know that this is one of my all-time favorite audiobooks. The production on this is like nothing else. If you are someone who enjoys New York City, you live in New York City, you visited, you have any sort of connection, you'll enjoy this novel that much more. I know I did. And it truly breathes life into a city that when you're there, you can feel it pumping below you. And this just so puts that feeling into words, into a book. And it's phenomenal. I don't want to give you anything else besides the fact that we follow 5 characters who are personified as the 5 boroughs. That's all I gotta say. I absolutely adore this book, this audiobook. If you have a chance, listen to it, pick it up. So good. With that being said, N.K. Jemisin also wrote the Inheritance Trilogy. I've only ever read the first one out of that. It was okay. That's one of her first novels, I believe. I enjoy what I showed you much more. But if you enjoy N.K. Jemisin, read her discography. It just, you'll really understand N.K. Jemisin. Oh, how could I forget about When Will It Be Black Future Month? That is a bunch of short stories just kind of surrounding Black culture in science fiction and fantasy. And wow, it's just really phenomenal. Read it because there are connections between all of her books in it too. And I absolutely adored seeing all of that. I really love when an author can just make it work. Give you connections, give you little Easter eggs in their books. It makes me so happy and excited. And N.K. Jemisin is just, like I've said, she is the queen to me of science fiction fantasy, the queen of narrative, the queen of perspective, and the queen of just everything in science fiction fantasy. And I love her. And for that, I had to leave her last on the list because she needed a rant. Okay, she needed me to rant about her. I get it. I needed to. But with that being said, those are all of the women that I have read in science fiction fantasy since 2020, minus Sarah J. Maas, because fuck her. I don't care about her. Stop reading Court of Thorns and Roses, stop reading Throne of Glass, and pick up any other book in this video. Anyways, I really enjoyed this, and I hope you did too. It was really interesting going through all of my books and seeing, where I can improve upon. Like I said, this list can be so much more intersectional, but it's just not. And does that say something about me, or does that say something about the publishing industry, who either A, doesn't publish books by these authors, or B, doesn't market them whatsoever, so no one ever knows about them? I don't know. I'm going to make more of a point for going out of my way and looking for books with more diverse perspectives, because I'd love to read about a whole different slew and range of people, of lives, of perspectives, and I'm so tired of just the classic 40-year-old white male, okay? And all of these books give you something other than that. And I absolutely am so thankful for every woman who has broken a barrier in science fiction fantasy, not only for me, an aspiring author, but for every other woman behind me. Every single one. Every single one. Okay? Every single one. And I'm so thankful and grateful for, if any of you authors are watching this video, for what you've been able to do for the community. Whether I like your books or not, I'm still so thankful for you guys paving the way for us and for our works, Me being a white female, I know there are many more white females in the space that are getting published than other, whether it's BIPOC or someone who isn't het presenting, because I am bisexual, but, I have a boyfriend. It's a het relationship. So, yeah, I know that I may have an easier time, but I just want to really amplify the voices that I've read from and the voices that I will be reading from. I've decided just now that this is going to be a series, probably only once a year. So not really a series, just a yearly video. Anyways, I had a super fun time doing this. Give it a like, comment down below some of your favorite fantasy science fiction written by a woman. Tell me, do you disagree with me? Do you think men should get more spotlight? Are you like James Patterson? Leave a hate comment down below. Just so you know, I think you're stupid. But that's fine. We all think we're stupid. Anyways, I had a great time filming this. Goodbye. I'll see you all in the next video.